Good afternoon. My name is Adam San. I'm here to talk about Google Gadgets. And the session right before this was also about gadgets. And so the first question is, wait, we've heard already about gadgets. There's two very different kinds. One is for desktop and one is for the web. And I'm here to talk about the web-based ones. And roughly speaking, I'm going to do an introduction to Google Gadgets, which are generically speaking, again, the web-based ones, the ones that plug into web pages and other kinds of web-based applications. And what are they, where do they live, and how do you write these things? And I'll go into a little bit of technical detail about the API itself for questions, because there's a lot of people who have already written these before. And then various tips and distribution tips, because the key thing behind these web-based gadgets is their value in distribution. You can reach a lot of users if you do it right, and that latter thing of do it right is the key, and we'll talk about that. So what are gadgets? They're basically just mini web pages. They live inside of iframes for security. And really, although there's a bit of XML around it for things like the title, at the center of it is just HTML. And of course, inside the HTML, you can put an arbitrary JavaScript. So for example, anything you can do in a web page, you can do inside of a gadget, such as Maps API. You can include Maps API in the middle of your gadget. And with this, we've done the various integrations so that you can write these things once, and then they'll run in a number of different Google products, as well as tens of thousands of websites all over the web, and IBM Web Server Portal, and a number of other products. And when you add all these up, you get a number on the order of hundreds of millions of page views a week. And in fact, we actually publish all the stats, so you can actually see them happen. And at the heart of this whole thing is a scaling problem. Trying to put up your own mashup site, your own application, means you have to pay for bandwidth. But actually, Google pays for that and takes care of that for you. And we do so because these gadgets drive web search traffic, and that's how we make our money, or one of the ways we make our money. So here's some examples of classic gadgets, everything from various games to clocks to Sudoku puzzles and maps. And people have come with all sorts of different kind of gadgets, and I'll talk a little bit about them. And where can you use these things, right? So they started out in the personalized homepage, which is now called iGoogle. But in fact, since then, we've put them not only in the personalized homepage, which everyone knows about, but also Google Desktop, the macOS dashboard. There's various connectors to get into these, in various enterprise applications. And the example here is IBM Web Server Portal, which is a really nice example of this. And third-party websites. So Puerto Vallarta.net is one of the leading travel sites for the city of Puerto Vallarta. And they have a webcam, but the way they got their webcam is they found it as a gadget. Yeah, I'm sure they could have found their own webcam application and installed it in their website. But the thing that Google Gadgets did is it made it really easy for them to install it. And I'll show you how they did it in a minute. And then, of course, it was announced yesterday that maps.google.com now supports these things called maplets. And if you look at a maplet, it's just a gadget. It's a gadget that is able to control the map, but all the normal gadgets will work. And as a fun experiment, you can add the date, time, the clock, into maps.google.com, and now you've got a clock right next to there. Now, I'm not sure exactly why you want that particular application versus others, but you can imagine maps applications side by side with the second map. And so you can see two maps side by side now. So there's a lot of these. We launched this back in December of 2005, and so we're coming up on our second year. And as of this morning, is something like 8,000 of these types of gadgets are not only out there, but able to, published and ready for use in various websites. There's many, many more of these that are not publishable, that people have not, said, no, I don't want this thing distributed. But over 8,000 of these things are available for your website. And this is a very exciting thing for us. And when you, again, add it up, there's a tremendous amount of traffic that's being distributed. But if you divide one by the other, which is to say the number of page views a week divided by the number of gadgets, this is a great opportunity to get traffic for your applications. So who writes these? Broadly speaking, there's a lot of indie developers who create these things, people like you and I who just do this because it's fun, it's a great experience, chance to learn Ajax, all the kinds of things that drive people to join the open source community and open source movement. But businesses also do this, and they do it to extend the reach of their brands. They do it to drive traffic back to their websites. In some sense, they think of these things as ads that are running on the personalized homepage and other properties, right? Now, of course, unlike an ad, you can't pay to be on the homepage. You have to create content that's really compelling to users, and then they'll opt into it. And so there's this it's a very subtle kind of thing, because with although 8,000 isn't that many, it's still enough that you have to compete to be on the first page of that directory where you're going to get a lot of this traffic. So you have to create something very, very compelling. And some of these gadgets here are very popular and some aren't. And I'm not going to tell you which is which. You can play around and see which ones you would opt into, and that will tell you the kinds of experiences. And we actually, when we get done, I have a hyperlink to a document that explains what we've learned about what's popular and what's not. So if you dig into the details of a gadget, this is sort of a typical looking gadget, you'll see there's these things called module prefs. This is basically where the declarative statements exist that tell Google's renderer and tell these other websites how big your gadget's supposed to be, who the author is for various authoring information. For example, if somebody wants to contact you about changes to the gadget, and other kinds of useful information. Then these user prefs, which is in the blue, control the settings for a gadget. Typically, gadgets have settings. Like, for example, in the clock, you can have what color is the background, right? If you have a map, it's what's the default zip code or area code or postal code for it. And then finally, there's this content section, and really that's just HTML. And so literally you place your HTML in there. And that's the whole thing. The editor for those settings is rendered by Google. We take care of that for you. And we take care of it for the various sites. So I said I was going to go create a gadget in this slide used to say 5 minutes, and then one of the engineers earlier this year created something called Scratchpad, and now it's 30 seconds. And so somebody's got a stopwatch. Let's see if I can do it. So this is the documentation for Google Gadgets. And at the bottom of the first page, you'll see this thing called Scratchpad. And it says Hello World example. And it says Hello World. And I'm going to change to say Hello Developer Day. And if my network is working, there we go, Hello Developer Day. So you can go ahead and immediately start creating these things right here in the middle of the documentation. And and you say, well, that's great, that's Hello World. How do I do something real? And conveniently enough, the same engineers gave you the ability to put an arbitrary URL in or click on one of these examples, and then it'll load it. And if you hit edit, you can see the source code. So this is a very fluid way to go create these things, and that's the idea. You notice there's no keys, there's no signups, there's no, you don't have to give your email address to Google to go do this. Anybody can go create these things, and that's really the idea. It's supposed to be completely open. So here's some advanced things you can do. Over the last year and a half, we've learned a lot of things about what people want, and we've put those into the API as optional features you can use or not. So running across the top, tabs is really popular, and the idea behind tabs is that you have different sort of modes that your gadget's in, and the user's able to select the mode. It's just like Firefox tabs. And this is very nice to have in there, and it's sort of one line of code to go do this. People want to have Flash inside of gadgets, and we've made it very easy to embed Flash inside of a gadget, so that it takes care of all of the idiosyncrasies of embedding Flash in HTML. Dynamic height is very interesting. When you have gadgets like a horoscope gadget, the amount of text in the horoscope depends on that day's horoscope. So it's very nice to be able to turn around and say, after you finish figuring out what's going to be inside the gadget right now, you call this function called dynamic height, and it will automatically resize the gadget to fit. Across the bottom is mini messages, are these dismissible little messages that you can tell users, hey, something's interesting going on, and they can say, great, I've read it once, I don't need to see it again. And it's sort of like a promotional message inside of your gadget. So new version available is a classic thing people put in there. And then lastly, again, people, we talk about a lot of traffic. Well, that's only good if we actually deliver. And so one of the things we did was we hooked up with Google Analytics, and which is a completely different set of the company, and made it really easy to embed analytics. Of course, you can put your own analytics in as well. You don't have to trust us. And there's a lot more to this. So the classic way is inside of your module prefs, you literally just say require feature equals that feature, and then there's some configuration to set it up. So in addition to sort of doing Google Analytics, which is the bottom of it, we also automatically create analytics for all the gadgets just to make it easy so that you don't have to do anything if you don't want. And automatically they're published out to the web of how many page views per week your gadget's getting. And that's not a made-up number. That's actually 32 million page views a week for the Wikipedia search gadget. And this is a teenager in the Netherlands who did this about a year ago. Now, I'll caution you, if you produce a gadget or you have produced one and you're not getting 32 million page views, the number one reason is probably that you haven't been around for a year. So it just takes a while to build up to that traffic. But in fact, you can actually watch all these other gadgets grow every single week and become more and more popular. So flash gadgets, we have, traditionally you had to do all this kind of messy, binding work to get it to embed correctly, embed a flash object inside of HTML. And one of our engineers said, this is crazy. We shouldn't ask people to have to do this. And so there's sort of one line of code to go do this. And again, this is all in the public documentation. There's no new announcements here. Fetching remote content. Again, one of the most powerful things about gadgets is, in fact, that we provide a proxy. And this was necessary because of JavaScript's same domain policy that wouldn't allow us to contact other sites on the web. But at the same time we did that, we also put in caching in it. And that allows you to retrieve data without melting down the origin site. And people use this all over the place to get live sports scores, up-to-the-minute live sports scores. Can you imagine millions of people up-to-the-minute live sports scores and not having a good proxy cache in there, right? You'd melt down almost any site in the web doing that. And in fact, in this case, the origin server is going to get a few thousand requests a day total, no matter how much traffic they're getting. You can fetch almost anything. You can get text or HTML, you can XML, RSS feeds, and we have various different ways that I'll talk about of parsing up that content to make it easy to incorporate into your gadget. So there's 3 APIs here that are kind of interesting. One is fetching the feed as JSON. So how many people here are familiar with JSON? Okay, good. Okay. So JSON, obviously, for those of you who aren't, is a format that's useful in JavaScript for handling data as it comes back. And fetch feed as JSON actually understands that what you're calling is an RSS or Atom feed. And there's, as you probably know, there's 7 or 8 different standards for these things. Fetch feed as JSON unifies them all down and picks out the titles and the items and so on. And this works great if you know exactly that this is an RSS feed or an Atom feed, and you just want the titles. If you have something that looks like XML in general, or it's an RSS 2.0 feed and it has extensions that wouldn't normally be fetched, then you can use fetch XML content and then parse it up as XML fields. And again, there's a nice easy API for extracting that data. And then finally, if you have something that's actually just text and it's not well formed XML, you can use fetch content generically to go capture this data. And again, in the documentation, you'll see examples of this. You can look at existing gadgets. It's all open source. So I'm not going to go through this all. The slides here are available as well for download, so you can actually see exactly all these examples and try them out. Okay. How many people here have written or are interested in writing international, meaning non-English or non-US applications? Great, and this is in Mountain View. You can imagine what it's like when the same talk being given, in Sydney. Probably everyone raise hands. So we actually ran into this ourselves. We launched a gadget for the World Cup last year and immediately discovered that if we don't do something, we're going to have to create 20 or 30 XML files and maintain them all, and that was going to be a mess. So we put in a system that allows you to extract the text messages of your gadget and other kinds of international information and pull those into separate files, one file presumably for each locale. And again, there's tons of documentation about this. In this example, Hello World has been internationalized, so there's an en.xml and a ja.xml for Japan. Storing state's really popular too. The same user prefs, where the user gets to set the value, we also create a programmatic API so that you as the programmer can also set those values. And that way the user sort of sets it up the first time, but then you can update it afterwards. In some sense, you can create your own edit window if you want. Another popular example by an author here in the audience was the Google 15 gadget, which tracks your weight every day. And this is created because the food at Google's too good. So the problem was that he wanted to actually make sure he wasn't putting on too many pounds. So he created the Google 15 gadget. And every day he logs in and puts his weight in, and it stores it as state. And again, this is the API that how to do it. And you can read it offline, I think, and there's plenty of docs. So caching external resources, it's very simple to describe and very complicated if you're doing a high volume gadget. So if you're doing high volume gadgets, feel free to post to the Google group and saying, hey, my gadget's starting to get 1 million page views a day. I need some help here, and we'll be happy to help. It's, if you're not receiving that kind of traffic, then a lot of this stuff is not nearly as important. And so the short version is that we cache all these XML files so you can put them on any server on the web, including like your own home DSL line or some dial-up. It's actually okay to put them on very unreliable services because we're going to fetch it, we're going to cache it, and if for some reason we can't reach the origin server, then we'll just keep serving the old file, and we'll do it for many, many days, and in some cases forever. So these fetch calls are also cached, and we do that both to protect the origin servers as well as to provide higher performance to end users. Because you can imagine trying to load a gadget and having to wait for one of these calls to go back up to Google and then go back to the origin site, which itself could be slow. So we cache all of it. And this, this date and time, for example, 156 million page views a week, you can imagine what it would do to the site if you didn't take advantage of these. And so we have lots of different solutions to this. Again, I would encourage you to go read about it online, involving things like being able to cache images and have Google serve your images instead of you having to do it. Caching arbitrary URLs like flash objects, same thing. And here's a couple of examples of it. I'll leave it up just a moment so that people on the video can see it. Again, there's tons of examples in the docs. All right, so distribution. The whole point of this is about distribution. So now we've gotten through how to build one of these more or less, and how do you distribute it? Well, of course, you can tell your friends. These things are URLs. They can install them in the personalized homepage. You can mail a friend off the personalized homepage, and you can do all these kinds of ways to distribute it to other people that are then adding it to the homepage. For example, you can create a Add to Google button, and the Add to Google button is a hyperlink that when the user clicks it, it then adds it to their personalized homepage. Right? So that's a very easy way to distribute. The much fancier thing, and the thing I was going to demo here, is how to add it to your web page, your own website, your own application, your own whatever. And I have up here the Maps search gadget. This is a version of Google Maps, including local business listings. And it's real, and this is a preview of it, but nevertheless, it's rendering the real gadget. And at the bottom, you get to configure the gadget. You can say, I want a different border. I want to change the location to 94703, which is Berkeley, California. And I apologize for the network latency here, but you can see it'll reload from Berkeley. And so you can configure the gadget to the way you want, and then when you're ready, you hit get the code. And then literally, there's the embed code that you would drop in. This is just like YouTube. This is just like all the other Web 2.0 companies that are then giving these embed codes you can install on your site. Okay. This is the Add to Google button I mentioned. We give you a little graphic if you want to use it. You don't have to. You can have your own text or your own graphic. That's fine. And here's what the URLs look like. The easiest way to find these programs, just type in do a Google search on Add to Google button, and you'll find this. So there's tons of documentation. And recently, we added an ability to pre-configure the gadget. And this is this UP_color. So color is a user pref in the date time gadget. And that user pref defaults, I guess, to blue. But if you want it to be pink, you say &UP_color equals pink. Okay. There's a lot of uses for this, as you can imagine. So submitting to the iGoogle content directory, there's a standard submit page, and you just give the URL of your gadget and hit submit. And then you're telling Google that you're authorizing us to distribute this gadget to our users. And there are some things you have to do, though. You can't just take an off-the-shelf, Hello World gadget and submit it. You have to have a good thumbnail, or it's going to be blank in the directory. If it doesn't have a title, no one's going to go click on your gadget. There's a bunch of tips here, and again, at the end, I'll leave you a URL that describes all these tips about how to make a gadget attractive. And lastly, there's the send to a friend example where you can actually email a gadget off your own homepage to individual friends. This doesn't scale all that well, but at least it's a way of getting virally your gadget out there. And actually, what you're emailing is this Add to Google button, as it turns out. So it's actually very simple. So, all right. So actually, one of the things about gadgets is it's all about you guys, not about us. So we don't really write as many gadgets anymore as we once did. And it's all about enabling you guys to do it. So I'm going to leave up all these URLs and start taking questions, because that's really, and no question too obscure, because that's really the goal of this. And so, with tens of thousands of developers out there, there's a great opportunity to ask the questions that other people, I'm sure, are going to want to hear. So with that, I'll open the floor. Does anybody have any questions? Microphone.
These gadgets can, after they're initialized, they can asynchronously download data?
Yeah, so the question was around whether they have to be synchronously rendered. In fact, it's actually, the default model is actually asynchronous. So the gadget downloads and is rendered asynchronously, and then when the data is available, then it gets rendered. So, yeah.
So I have two questions. One is a really dumb one, but in what way does a gadget drive traffic to your website?
Oh, that's a great question. So yeah, the question was around how the gadget drives traffic to your website. Maybe the easiest thing for me to do is give you an example. So that horoscope gadget, which is really doing quite well actually, is so if you look at the horoscope gadget, this is a very simple one. It's one of the earliest ones, and it's doing a tremendous amount of traffic. Right at the bottom is just a hyperlink, a very simple hyperlink saying if you want some more information, it'll take you to tarot.com. And this is essentially an ad for tarot.com, and it's using content they were already producing.
Right, but so how do visitors who are doing Google searches arrive at this
I see.
gadget?
So this is actually not so much distributed through Google search. There's this new co-op program where gadgets can appear at the top of web search, but by the numbers, most of them are coming from the personalized homepage, in fact. So users are opting into your gadget, and they're finding it in the directory of gadgets. Okay. And that directory is here, and you can see that the 8,000 gadgets. Assuming my network comes up, you'll see the 8,000 gadgets, and people go there from time to time to add things to their homepage. And there are other techniques as well. Now on the homepage, when you add a new tab on the homepage, it asks you to name it, and when you name it, you're giving Google a hint about what kind of content you want on the page, and then we automatically pre-fill it with a bunch of gadgets. And as an author, if you're creating content that makes it into that top 6, then immediately you get that.
Okay. The second question is, how suitable is this as a mechanism for a B2B environment?
Oh, that's a great question. So how simple is it for B2B?
How suitable is it?
Oh.
How appropriate is it to use gadgets as a way of driving traffic?
I'm not as much of a B2B guy, to be honest. I came out of enterprise. I came out of sort of enterprise and out of enterprise software and out of consumer software. And but IBM is extremely excited. Like, it blew me away how excited they were. And when they announced that they were going to incorporate gadgets into Web Server Portal, and then when they actually did it, the amount of press and the amount of interest, and the whole companies realigning themselves to distribute their applications as gadgets, just blew me away. So Aprio, which is a big Salesforce.com partner, just released a bunch of gadgets that represent their application online. Atelos is another startup that does CRM for Google.com. And they distribute an entire CRM application in the form of gadgets. And the list keeps going on and on and on. And I think it'll be very interesting to see what, how this sort of plays out. But at the same time, I know there's a tremendous amount of interest both inside and outside of Google for taking advantage of the homepage as a place where you can get business applications. Why not? I mean, there's nothing wrong with it, and it's perfectly secure. And it's a great place people go anyway. Why wouldn't you want to have your business application right there? Today, I think the more popular thing right at this moment is what I call dual-use gadgets. So we have a lot of gadgets that are both consumer and business use. The most famous is Google Calendar, create a really high-quality gadget. And I don't know, is that for your business or is that for your personal use? I don't know anymore. And that's a really good example.
Thank you.
I have a question about portability between, say, the desktop version and the web version. Are they very portable, or, I mean,
yeah.
There's like a lot of platform-specific widgets, gadgets, whatnot, and that's part of the thing. Like, I'm not sure if I'm trying to reach the mass of people, which ones I should be concentrating on developing.
Yeah, so the question is around portability. And I wish I could stand up here and say, everything ports everywhere, and that's just not true, unfortunately. And we're trying to get there. I mean, I think the web-based gadgets that I'm talking about are probably the most portable of any of the widget systems out there. And still, there's a lot of places where they don't run.
So within Google itself, though, at least the desktop gadgets and the web gadgets, are they portable?
Yeah, so the web gadgets run inside of desktop.
Okay.
And so you can at least get that level of portability.
Okay.
And there are some features that don't work in certain environments, but for the most part, everything kind of works. So for example, Maplets, Maplet's only going to work in maps.google.com right now. So, yeah.
Hi there. How do you handle versioning of gadgets? And like, if I'm a gadget author, how might I help my users upgrade?
Yeah, so the question is around versioning these gadgets. So actually, you probably noticed there's no version stamp anywhere here, and we actually don't have, if you have a good idea for what we ought to do, let me know. We don't actually have a notion of a version. What we do instead is the authors create a different XML file and put the version number in the file name. And so you see this sometimes, those people have in the title the version number. And then you can use an Add to Google button, for example, to then get people to upgrade. And that Add to Google button, for example, could be part of a mini message. So you could say, new version available, click here to upgrade or something. And, but I think the most popular model for upgrading versions, frankly, is to be backward compatible forever and simply upgrade in place. And just be really careful about it. But that's been by far the most popular model for these. And we have Gadget authors who are on their 6th and 7th version now of their gadgets. Yeah.
Have you done any testing of Google Gadgets on non-PC devices with browsers, such as Opera browsers on a mobile phone or something?
Yeah. So the question is around non-PC devices and gadgets. So, there's been, there's no sort of official announcements that we have, at this time about it. The basic requirement for gadgets is that we have to have a browser-like environment with HTML and JavaScript. And obviously web connectivity, at least at the moment that you're downloading the gadget. Obviously with desktop, for example, it gets downloaded and then rendered, and then if you disconnect, it more or less stays. But obviously, for example, if it's a search gadget and you try to run a search, the web connection's necessary in order to get the data. So that's the connectivity limit. But otherwise, there's nothing to announce. But feel free to give it a try. I mean, I tried it on I tried it on my phone and it seemed to work okay. So give it a try and let us know.
Yeah. Can you put links or advertising in your gadgets?
There's nothing that stops you, and people do. Right now there's sort of this question around whether or not Google will or won't or does or doesn't support AdSense inside of gadgets, and I don't have an official answer on that. I do know that some of these larger ad formats that were meant for whole web pages don't work well inside of a gadget. There's just 3 and 4 lines of text. There's just not enough room for it. But people have been experimenting with various kinds of promotional links inside of there, and it's your rectangle. You do what you want inside there. I mean, if the users hate it, they'll hit the X, right? I mean, one of the things that we did is we left that X. Google's, especially on the consumer side, is absolutely extremely devoted to the user experience, to the point where they actually make it hard for us developers sometimes. But one of the things that was, even in that environment of a sort of extreme user-focused design, was they left an X in the upper right corner where a user at a moment's notice can say, I'm tired of this gadget, it's gone. And there's an undo button, of course, but the idea is that if you don't respect your users' intentions, whatever they are, they're going to hit X on you. And we've seen this over and over again where gadgets break or somebody didn't test it well. And the users start hitting the X. And of course, when they start hitting the X, your ranking in the directory starts going down too. So it's bad news. So what I tell people is when it comes to advertising, promotions, or even just heavy branding, like if you're running a gadget for a major airline and they want to put a giant airplane logo in the corner, just remember that your users may or may not want that. And if they don't want that, first of all, your gadget may never be popular, so you may never hear about this. And secondly, if it is already popular, before you make this decision, you may lose that popularity. It's really hard to get back. So our advice is to err on the side of caution and be very spare with the branding, be very spare with promotional links, but feel free to experiment and see what works.
The last question I have is for security.
Yeah.
Security built into it as far as business to business or...
Yeah, so all the gadgets run inside of iframes, and we're using a lot of the same security techniques that are used to protect Google's advertising as well. Okay. And the idea is that the container pages that house these gadgets can't reach into the gadget, and the gadget can't reach into the container. So yeah, no, security is obviously paramount here.
Yeah, the title of this suggested that it was going to be more about content. In gadgets and content syndication.
Yeah.
And the most popular ones really don't look like what most people would call content per se. So I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit more about actual content syndication success stories.
Sure. Yeah, so sure. So there's a number of gadgets that are doing very well under syndication, and sometimes it's not the ones you might think. I was actually really surprised that Google Map is doing extraordinarily well under syndication, meaning on third-party sites, not just at Google. And it surprised me because we already have the Maps API, so people can already embed maps. But what we discovered, I think, is that people found it really easy to do it because there was no code involved. You literally just, if you're a webmaster, you just paste this in and it just works. And the second thing is that it's sort of pre-configured in some sense. It has a couple of extra features already set up, so you don't have to make a lot of decisions around it. And to the extent to which you have to make decisions, you can do it here in this sort of GUI environment instead of in the code. So that's an example of one that worked really well under syndication. The Google Talk gadget was designed to syndicate out the chute, and it's on a lot of sites now as well. People like to leave it on their blog and store it on their own personal home pages and so on. So there's a number of cases like that.
So another question that I have is, not very many people actually use RSS in the real world on the web. And I'm wondering what kind of adoption rate you're seeing for personalization in using of the gadgets.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. There's a bunch of statistics that we don't release for a variety of reasons, but the ones that we can talk about is sort of tens of millions of users actually use gadgets every week, and you can see sort of the page view traffic is. I think it's fair to say it's sort of above the line in terms of being relevant, not just to sort of a niche technical audience, but to the mainstream audience. And I think if you sort of look at the most popular gadgets, everything from My Pony to to various games, this is clearly not a technical crowd. If anything, I'd say the crowd that's using gadgets tends to be very, very different than the ones who adopted RSS feeds. Although it's a very savvy, observation that there's a resemblance here to RSS in some sense, and in fact, a lot of the original work around gadgets came out of people who were working on RSS and were frustrated with some of the limitations because you can't in RSS create an interactive game, right? There's just limits to what you can do, and but one isn't a replacement for the other because in the RSS world, there's notions of update time and show me only the newest stories, and gadgets don't have any of that. It's really just a rectangle. Now you can put the two together in a mashup, and people do all the time. In fact, a lot of these examples that I showed before are in fact just mashups of that. Entertainment Week having the latest news about stars and so on. Where are they getting that? They're getting it from RSS feeds. In fact, they're recycling their existing RSS feeds, reformatting them as a tab or something else inside of a gadget. And this is very, very common. P. Diddy has a gadget, for example, or his record company created one for him, right? And the news section of that, which is the thing that's going to drive P. Diddy fans to keep coming back, that's, I'm sure, underneath the hood, that's got to be an RSS feed because that's the way that people publish, news and timely information like that.
Hi, I have two questions. One is, as a gadget developer, how do you find out whether something's going wrong with your gadget or you're getting some like negative trends on your gadget or whatever? Or does Google come back and give a report?
Yeah, so the question is around how do you get feedback about your gadget? Well, there's a couple different feedback mechanisms. And they range in both the character of the feedback as well as the immediacy of it. So one of them, of course, is Google Analytics. If you use Google Analytics inside your gadget, then you'll actually see real traffic. But of course, that won't tell you what's going wrong. It just says something's not going right? The other thing is that there's a feedback form on the actual details page of the gadget. It's a confusing thing. We actually have two different directories for a variety of reasons. And this is the one that's meant for developers. The one that's for consumers looks almost the same, but has a different ranking function and so on. And if you go here, you can see feedback from consumers about your gadget, including star ratings and all the things you're used to from YouTube and other sites like that. Not all the feedback's helpful, but it's reasonably good. And you'll hear, more importantly, general trends if there's problems. And the last is that there's an author email field in your gadget, and then you can email the author. There it is, contact the developer. And when somebody hits that, then they're emailing you. And you don't have to worry about spam. Just go get yourself a Gmail account. If you don't have one, we'll give one to you. I think it's now open signups. And Gmail takes care of statistically all the spam, which actually works out really nicely. So you can actually publish a Gmail address for each of your gadgets. And in fact, all the internal authors do that, and we just look at the feedback and we know, uh-oh, I broke it somehow. So.
Oh, and the second question is there anybody who's making a majority of their income creating Google gadgets?
the answer is actually yes. It sort of shocked me, but there was a consulting group in Israel that kind of quit all their jobs about a year ago to focus just on gadgets, and they're actually doing very nicely. And there's another group, there's another startup that's all based on just writing gadgets. They're not a gadget platform, they just write gadgets for big brands. And there's a number of independent consultants now that essentially have moved, and again, it's the classic open source model. They've just moved their income over time. But like anything else, it starts as a hobby, right? You do a little bit of work on the side, somebody pays you for it, you know, and you try it out, or you do some kind of affiliate program to create a really compelling, you know, gadget from some site that pays you for affiliate fees. And next thing you know, you start getting enough traffic, and you're like, huh, you know, there's enough work here to do, and it's enough interest. You know, something maybe I want to start spending more of my time doing this. And that model was how the web started, you know, 15 years ago or so, and I watched my friends do this. We all started, I'm a software engineer, well, now I'm a webmaster. and that's exactly what happens. And I don't know, will they be called gadgeteers? I don't know. I just know if the traffic keeps going and the monetization is there and big brand advertisers, you know, like the record companies and so on, need to create these things, and there's not enough people to go do it, they're going to turn to the indie consulting community. And that's part of the reason that I'm here, is because we actually right now are facing a situation where we have more demand than we have supply, and so it's a good problem to have, but it is a problem, and we kind of need your help to fill the gap. And there's the top authors page from the last talk actually is based on the same technology as the one for these kind of gadgets. It's the same thing, only these are the top I guess universal gadget authors, and these guys, and you can see all the gadgets they've written and so on. And when these people land on this top page, actually they're the ones who end up getting the consulting contracts and other kind of work. And as I said, right now it's pretty lucrative. I don't know if it will be 2 years from now, and that's the way these things go. There's a declining curve, but at the same time there's enough technology involved, and it's coming faster actually than it had been even 6 months ago, meaning more APIs integrating with gadgets, more places, more things to know about writing good gadgets, that it seems like it's becoming more complicated to become a top author than it had been. And, but at the same time, the rewards are much greater. So we're seeing a lot of people trying it out, and if you get lucky, and next thing you know, you're Adam Bowman and landing on this page. So.
Do you know of any kids creating gadgets?
It's a great question. Are there any kids creating gadgets? Actually, yeah. It's I have a couple stories. When we first launched it, we were sitting around the office and sort of taking parlor bets on who the top gadget authors are going to be, and I said, well, it's going to be a teenager from the Midwest, right? And it's because this is the kind of demographic I see with a lot of these new technologies. And sure enough, it was a 16-year-old from Arkansas who was our #1 gadget author for 6 months. And likewise, the Wikipedia gadget, which is still one of the top gadgets, came out of the Netherlands and is also a teenager. And the last story, I don't remember where he is in the list, but if you get on the list, one of the guys creates gadgets with his daughter, and she's the one who comes up with the ideas. He writes the code. And that's another very common model. There's a number of people at Google who are of all different ages, but it's often not the gray hairs who come up with the best ideas, because they're not the ones who use Facebook. They're not the ones who use these sites where they're going to see what the latest things are and what people really want. So, yeah. Great. Okay. Well, thanks a lot, and feel free to grab me after this. And there's a lot of interesting things happening.